evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us online and in the ULP house. This is our last Women in Energy session for the year, but it's going to be an exciting one. Today we're going to be focusing on professional moms as well as branding and how to position yourself as a competitive value proposition. The Women in Energy, ULP Women in Energy Forum is really about bringing leaders from across the energy industry to come and engage on some of the challenges they have faced and ways that they have overcome and transcended the barriers to career pathing, the barriers to entry in becoming leaders. We're going to have an exciting session today. We've got a broad variety of speakers from the oil and gas industry, from the banking industry, from the consulting industry. We have Ms. Peggy Sukumalo, Head of Wealth from Standard Bank, Advocate Thandi Orlane, who's the chairperson of BP South Africa, Ms. Barbara Makuberu, who's the CFO of Shell Downstream South Africa, Ms. Charlotte Mkwena, who is the EVP of HR and Corporate Affairs at SASO, Mr. Kadan Lakmiran, who's the partner at McKinsey Consulting. And then, of course, we have our convener, Ms. Priscilla Mabelani, as well as our host, if I can say, who initiated the whole process, Mr. Maurice Radebe, who's the chairperson of ULP. So we're going to go straight into the introductory remarks.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight I have the most difficult job. It's usually done by Maurice. So I would try my level best to make sure that I do it right. Welcome everyone on the line. Untitled, thanks for the introduction, as well as to our panel. It's great to have here and to be surrounded by a phenomenal panel. I'm really looking forward to learning from you. Just as an overview of Women in Leadership, which was Women in Energy, which was started as Women in Oil and Gas by Dr. Maurice, given his passion in our industry a couple of years ago. I've had a privilege over the last 3 years to be part of this and to be requested to lead such a fantastic platform has been really an honor and a privilege for me. Few highlights. As we started the journey, those of you who joined us in August, we spoke passionately about the role of women in the transitioning economy that we're seeing, really being fundamental to the economic challenges, as well as stimulating and participating in the new opportunities that our industries and our businesses play. But at the same time, we do recognize that as mothers, as wives, as sisters, and as daughters, we face a number of challenges. And some of those are social challenges that we are faced with. In August, we also spoke about the really heartfelt statistics that when you have to talk about it, your heart almost sunk. Really, the gender-based violence that we faced as women, and the fact that 30% or so, I would usually say 1/3 of us, get subjected in our lifetime to gender-based violence. And it can destroy families, it can destroy all of us. Yet at the same time, we're expected to get to the work environment and be productive, to be competitive. So today, we have decided to put an exceptional talent that have actually walked this path of what it actually feels to be a mother, to be a wife, to be a professional and a successful woman, to really break the funnel that we spoke about in August. They will share their experiences. At the same time, we felt it was not important that one of the things we usually do as human beings is to really look at challenges from our angle only. But at times, I strongly believe that it's important that we look at things also from the lens of others. So we thought it would be important to bring a brother to come and share with us his experiences, because it's easy to say we have all of these responsibilities, and yet I do believe that our colleagues, our male colleagues, are also facing similar challenges. They have similar passions and aspirations in terms of their own personal and their careers, and they can also share their views. But I'm also quite excited to hear how you experience this as women in the work environment. And to open this, I thought I should just share one of my inspirational women, Michelle Obama, who said in one of the quotes, you should never view your challenges as a disadvantage. Instead, it's important for you to understand that the experience that you're facing and overcoming that adversity is actually one of your biggest advantages. I can say, as a single mom, having lost a husband at a very early stages, having to raise two beautiful girls, and having to be absent in their life, one of the most daunting parts of my life is just thinking that a number of professional women will have to do and have to go through the path that I went through to be successful in their life. And that for me is a nightmare. So I do hope that with some of the insights that we'll get today, we'll be able to get some nuggets, to be able to shape our own lives, and to remember that we are not defined by the societies that we live in. We are defined by God and our own purpose, and our life is our own destination. And I'm looking forward to learning from you tonight. And really, welcome to the ULP. And be open, be frank, and I hope that you can also share some of those challenges and that you might have thought you could have handled them better, because it's through those things that it will become better. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you tonight. And to the Hadebe family, Dade Morris, Ma Joyce, who's not here, and the beautiful kids, and the lovely brother, who I call him my brother, because he's actually the son-in-law. Morris and I fight over Theo. Thanks again for a great session and for hosting us, and I wish all the best. Looking forward to this tonight.
Thank you, Priscilla. We're going to go straight into it because we've got quite a few inputs, and I know that everybody's prepared to really give their nuggets and their contribution and their reflections on this topic. So we're going to kick off immediately with Advocate Thandi Orlane. Please share your experiences with us.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I must thank Maurice, Priscilla, and the team at ULP for inviting me to be part of this awesome panel. I'm aware that Priscilla and Maurice have persevered to rope me in, and at last I'm excited to be participating in the We Think Tank session tonight. As I was preparing for this session, I, like everybody else who's going to speak in public, you try to look for wisdom from some authors, from your favorite books, and you think, this is going to make me wise and look really smart. So I went back to a book I devoured when it came out in 2015, Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg. And Sheryl was advising women on how to manage this tension between being a career woman as well as a mother. How to try and manage to make sure you can have it all. As I was patting myself on the back, I thought back to an article I came across around 2018. And that article was written by Kathleen Goldstein. Kathleen, in her article, broke down the myth that all of us can lean in, and that there are other ways in which one has to look at how to manage. Lean in may work for one, but may not work for others. So tonight I decided I'm going to share some of my own experiences. But then, I think my experiences may be 3 generations early for most of our audience. Nonetheless, you may be able to pick up some to be able to map out your own path. Firstly, I changed the topic to say, professional parent concept and at middle management whilst building your own brand. I thought I could put together the parenting and also remind you that you've always got to think about your brand. It's important, firstly, to frame appropriately. In this day and age, we talk about diversity and inclusivity. The JSE's latest requirements are that boards have got to be diverse in terms of age, race, gender, culture, experience, as well as skills. So as we look at that diversity, we've got to be very conscious of how we are framing. What is the language that we are using? Because if you do not become conscious of the language you are using, you then start othering others. Fathers who are the primary caregivers are not allowed into the conversations about moms. Combining parenthood and a professional career is one of the most difficult lifestyle choices anyone can make. We heard Priscilla had to make that choice. And the word choice I use advisedly because you may say, I had no choice. But you could take a lighter job, have a thinner budget, and then have time for your children. You could have a garden patch, a cup of chicken, but you choose a high-powered career when you are also wanting to choose to have children. Because you could also choose not to have children. And therefore, how can anyone achieve such a huge feat? And only one word comes to mind, and that is deliberate. You have to be deliberate. And when I look back at over 40 years of my career, I realized that without consciously understanding it, I became very deliberate. Maybe I should bring it closer. Think about people like Kanye Mbau, Angelina Jolie, or recently, Donald Trump. Isn't he deliberate? Trying to hold on to the White House? So, ladies and gentlemen, you have to analyze and reflect on your own circumstances. You may be a single mom or dad, a married couple, cohabiting, or in a communal environment. And when you become deliberate, you then can manage how you are going to advance your brand as a career woman, as a career man, once you are trying to make sure that you bring wholesome children. So when I was out of college, doing my articles, dating my dear husband from very far, I had to be very deliberate. I was based in Port Elizabeth and he was in Johannesburg. And I realized that I did want to marry him. He had already indicated 8 years before that he wanted to marry me. So now I had to be deliberate about making the choice to marry my husband. I had to decide what are negotiables and what are non-negotiables. For instance, I wanted to keep my surname. And I'm talking early 80s. So I had to be deliberate about ensuring that I kept my surname because I felt I was at university, I had lived, I had a brand. Imagine, poof, you sign your name away and nobody knows you. That was not going to happen to me. Be deliberate in your execution, maybe starting by planning. You have to be deliberate about what you're planning. I had decided to be a lawyer. Under apartheid, I had to decided to be a human rights lawyer. It was not going to be an easy time. And I did decide to have children. Imagine marrying a chief and you decide not to have children. Who's going to take over? Maybe you should add a dollop of prayer. Because I prayed that my firstborn be a boy. Because imagine if I had a girl, And now in the traditional way of traditionalists, they wouldn't want my girl to inherit the chieftainship. So I did have a boy, so the solution was there. People talk about flexibility and spontaneity. You'll have to stop me in 10 minutes. I've got 2. Flexibility and spontaneity. It's well and good. You have to be flexible. You have to be spontaneous. But it must be after you've planned, you've budgeted, and you've ensured that you have a few cents left to be spontaneous. And that is how, ladies and gentlemen, I believe you have to navigate your career, your life, your children, your branding. Those who have attended my chairman's sessions will know that I talk about the support systems that you put around you. I don't have time to do that. Maybe I'll start my blog, and then you can follow me to get more about this type of approach. So thank you very much. I'll take questions later.
Thank you so much, Advocate Orlane. I think you raised some very important pointers. One, being conscious of your choices. The language is important, especially not to others. Being deliberate with your terms and conditions, with your T's and C's, as well as your planning. And then, of course, the importance of flexibility and spontaneity. Finalizing with the importance of support systems. Thank you so much. We're going to move now to the head of Wealth South Africa at Standard Bank, and Ms. Peggy Sukumalo on her insights.
Thank you so much. Good evening to Mr. Maurice Khadebe, to Priscilla. Thank you so much for having me on this panel. To all our distinguished guests joining us online, we all know that we live in the world of being virtual, which is great, and I think we've learned so much in this time. So for me, it's truly a distinct privilege and just such a great opportunity to connect with everyone online, but also to sit in this very esteemed panel of powerful women and men. I think that many of them have met me along the way in my career in banking. So it truly is an honor to be sitting on this panel. But I also want to say to the ladies, especially Mam Thandi, if I can call you Mama, I think, thank you for being a trailblazer and shattering barriers for us to join you. I think many of us stand on your shoulders, and many other women who came before us. And I'm always reminded of that. We cannot own the success that we have in our respective spaces without acknowledging and giving recognition to that. So thank you very much for making the circle bigger and making sure that we can join you. So for me, I think, when I met with Maurice and he asked me if I could, join this event and participate, I was so excited. He knows that, women leadership and just advocating on behalf of women is such an important topic to me. It's something that I'm very passionate about. And I think sitting on this panel tonight, yes, I might not be in the energy sector. I come from the banking financial services, and we all know that equally it's an industry or a sector that is very male-dominated. So I think I resonate with the path and the journey that has been traveled by women who sit within the energy sector. So I think, first and foremost, I think women's rights are human rights. I think we must always start and depart from that and understand that. And I'm so happy, Priscilla, that you invited our male colleagues to join us, because we cannot have these conversations in the absence of our male counterparts. And I think really salute and honor to Maurice for driving this. I know that he advocates on behalf of women, he advocates on behalf of young men in their respective professionals, and I know he mentors so many professionals across different sectors. And I think it's so important when we have the conversation around women in leadership that we have our male counterparts, because they also have a part to play in this. I think for me, so many things have resonated by what Mama has said, but by what Priscilla said as well. So I think having charted a path in financial services, being a mother, I must confess, Priscilla, that I'm a late boomer, so I bought my daughters very late in my years, but I was still very determined to build my career in financial services. And I sit in front of you today as a single parent. Many of you would know that I lost my husband last year. But that didn't deter me, because I think, we learn and we grow from these experiences that life throws at us. And I think women should never be put in a position where they have to make the choice of being a career woman or be a mother. I think for me, you can equally lean into both and really bring your greatness and navigate the environment with a lot of grace. And I think women are able to do that all the time. So to me, I think, the best definition of just gender equity, and this is something that we speak a lot about in financial services, what is that? And I think for me, it's about having access to rights and opportunities that are unaffected by the gender that you hold as a person. And I think bringing that definition into the workplace means that I am treated, and the opportunities offered to me should be fair and based on my ability, and not be out of reach because I'm a woman. I also do think when I talk about women in leadership, the path to power has been particularly narrow and distinctively challenging for women of color. And I think we need to acknowledge this. And it's something that we really need to bring to the fore and put into sharp focus when we're having conversations around women leadership. I think as we offer perspective, we need to understand on women's leadership and how it has evolved over time. It is with this recognition that the evolution has not looked the same for all women. And I think that women, we've witnessed obviously a landmark of shifts in just this time of COVID. And I think what for me is really beautiful about women leadership is the fact that, yes, we assume the positions of power in our respective organizations, in our respective communities, but what we exert, I think the fact that we exert influence on the decisions that determine humanity's common social and economic fate is what makes women leadership so beautiful for me, is that over and above having and holding those leadership positions, but we are also able to exert our influence on decisions that are made around how do we really treat our communities, how do we champion our communities, and it's so important that we continue to lean in and champion our communities and their economic faith. And I think coming into Standard Bank and holding the position that I've been so honored and privileged to hold, for me it was important, when we talk about wealth, everyone defines wealth in the traditional sense of what wealth means to people, which is owning assets, being financially privileged. And I think for me, wealth is more than that. We need to have a wealth that speaks to everyone in our country, that is transformative, that is inclusive, so that everyone feels that they can be on a wealth journey and they can build their journey as they go along. So it's something that I've really championed in the bank, and I've tried to make sure that as we have these conversations about the type of clients that we'd like to serve and honor, that we are very inclusive and transformative around our mandate. And I think it's very important that we continue to do that. Now, coming back to being in a sector that lacks gender diversity, I think for me, I always saw that as an opportunity. Yes, it's been a challenge, and I've got so many stories to tell around what has happened to me. I think for those of you who know my journey, first of all, I had to break the barrier of people looking at me through the lens of where I've come as a person. Having been a Miss South Africa, they first look at you and that becomes their lens of who you are, instead of actually looking beyond that. So I've had to break that barrier, and it hasn't been an easy one, but I'm always up to the challenge, and I always see opportunity in everything that I do. So starting my career in London, coming into South Africa, I've always really tried to make sure that I do not try and seek acceptance from my male colleagues. I try and do things my way. I try and show up in a way that suits me and do things the way I feel fit that I should be doing things. And I think as women, we should not spend our energy or waste our energy trying to fit into male-dominated environments. I think, it takes away from your brand, it takes away from being authentic, and I think authenticity is such an important narrative for everyone. So I really have tried to redirect my focus entirely into doing great work and doing it my way. And I think when you take all the energy that we spend trying to fit into a narrow box and you put that into yourself and being the boldest version of yourself, actually magic really happens. And I say this to young women, who are professionals, that you need to make sure that you become the boldest version of yourself. And when we talk about having a seat at the table, you can have the seat and own it, but the voice is what is critical. So I think increasingly, we must make sure that as women, as we lean in, Mamtandi, as you say, I also love that book by Sheryl Sandberg, as we lean in, it's not only about the seat that we have at the table, but it's about the voice that we bring to that conversation and that discussion. And that is something that I have tried to do in every role that I've held in financial services. And this has become quite an empowered outlook for me and has enabled me to really build a thriving career in financial services, spanning from asset management, capital markets, wealth, renewable energy, financing, and building BE principal finance platforms. I'm also aware that I think as women, one of the things that we need to do more of is to advocate on behalf of each other. I think women need to really we need to hold each other accountable in terms of how we show up for each other. It is such an important aspect of what we do every single day in the positions of influence that we hold. And I think your brand around that is important, making sure that you give your time, you mentor somebody, you listen to someone. Mama always says to me that you should treat everybody the same, irrespective of who they are. So when you meet Umama who's making tea in the workplace, she is equally as important as the CEO who's sitting in his little office, because her space where she's making the tea, she is the CEO of that space. She has to make decisions and influence things in that space. So that principle of just treating people equally and making sure that you honor them as best as you can is something that is very important. And I think as women, we do have an obligation to empower each other. And I always use this phrase, and I believe in it wholeheartedly, that as we rise, we have an obligation to lift. And I think, many of us sitting in this panel have had that opportunity. We've been mentored by, women who have really given us the opportunity to really, lift us as they have progressed in their respective careers. And I think what I love about this topic is that, is it 1 minute? Okay. What I love about this topic, I find it so powerful for me because when we share our experiences, we invite others to do the same. The connections that we build in moments of vulnerability are so powerful. And I think women need to do more of that. We need to share our stories. We need to be able to inspire those around us, because I think when we share our stories, we're able then to give others the permission to do the same. And I think, just in closing, when you are talking around a brand, every day that you show up, you're a brand. And I think women should always recognize that and make sure that you do not forget about your own brand. Sitting here, you are Peggy Sue, this is your brand, this is how you show up, and this is how the world is going to look at you. So I do think that in closing, I would also like to just quote Sheryl Sandberg, where she says, we need women at all levels, including the top, to change the dynamic, reshape the conversation, and to make sure that women's voices are heard and heeded and not overlooked and ignored. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Peggy Sue. I think that's a very clear message about the importance of how we show up in making decisions, set the bar, how we show up in breaking barriers, how we show up in lifting other women up as we rise. We're now going to come to Ms. Barbara Makuberu, who is the CFO of Shell Downstream South Africa.
Thanks, Ntato. I think let me also start by thanking Ntate Khadebe, Priscilla, and the ULP family for inviting me to this panel. I think it is really such a great privilege for me to be sitting here at this table with the giants. And I say that because all these women that are here, also as panelists, really they are the women that I respect, that I draw a lot of wisdom just through watching them as well. And also to echo what my fellow panelists have said already, that really having a male a friend on the panel is really quite important to really have that other lens so that we can also hear how we show up, but also get some wisdom in terms of how we can do better. So, and good evening to all the participants who have joined us online, and really thank you very much for making the time for us to engage on this important topic. I think this subject matter that we are engaging on today of gender inclusion, but also of this challenge of stereotyping of professional women, especially professional mothers in the workplace. I think it's real, it's very important, and I don't think we can ever engage sufficiently on it. But also at the same time, I mean, it's something that we cannot necessarily fully eradicate, but through this type of conversations, these honest conversations, the transparent conversations, we do create that level of awareness in terms of the challenges that professional women are actually facing out there. And also given the status quo, when you really look at the female representations, especially in the positions of power, positions of authority and influence, there isn't just many at the moment. I know that we have made some progress, yes, albeit very slow, but we have made some progress. And even when we look at our own sector, in terms of the energy sector, I mean, just looking by the sheer amount of wisdom around us here, it also testament that we are making some progress. But the reality is that the stereotyping is still there, and that is one of those obstacles that is really holding back women from really progressing and pushing their aspirations in the workplace. So, and then with that, I mean, I do also recognize that in all of us, there is so much that we can do in terms of being those change agents. I think in terms of what we were going to be talking about today also, in terms of how can organizations really make a space or create that enabling space for women to thrive. I think that is also quite important. But what I wanted just to focus on just briefly is also the whole point around it also starts with us as professional women. I mean, I do remember from my own experience when I realized that I was expecting, I really had to make those deliberate decisions and affirm myself that one, I am going to enjoy my time as an expectant mother, no matter what, I'm going to enjoy that, but also having to make those affirmations about I am going to do my best to raise my child the best way that I can. And I think also that was necessitated by my reality also at the time, because I was barely a month into a new role at the time at the new company, which is Shell, the company that I'm at the moment, but also being aware of the perceptions that as career women always are with us in terms of when a woman decides, whether you decide or whether it happens sometimes to have a child, that gets perceived as you are actually opting out of your career aspirations. That sometimes gets perceived as people start thinking that you are going to be less effective, you are going to be less productive, you are going to be distracted. And I think for me, at the time when I became pregnant, I also had that need in me to try and demystify some of those perceptions. And also knowing, especially in the role that I had just taken, I was going to be a leader of a team as well. And I had my whole intention that I was going to be hiring women. So I really felt it in me at the time that I really needed to do as much as I can to demystify some of those perceptions. But also I think when I said it out loud in terms of my intentions to enjoy my pregnancy and also do my best to raise my child, it also ignited something in me that, yes, it was there, but it really just ignited in me that even more need to even pursue excellence and at the level that I didn't even think that I was at. So it really pushed me to even be more focused, be more effective, to really try and be as great as I can in the workplace. And I think that is where I also just wanted to touch, that as much as we can talk about organizations creating that enabling space, I think we also need to recognize that it starts with us as professional women. And for me, it was through those moments where I had to sit down and I had to try and solidify my aspirations about where I really wanted to go, how far did I want to go with my career, because of course my reality has changed. So I really had to sit and reflect and solidify how far I wanted to go, because I think it was through that, and when I could articulate that a little bit clearly in my mind, and I'm not talking about trying to figure out what position, what title. It's really just about how far do you want to pursue this career. I mean, it was there in me. I studied to be chartered accountant, but just in terms of how far, and that really helped me to also start framing in my mind what kind of support structures I needed to set out for myself. But also it helped me to become even a little bit more gentler with myself. And I say gentler and kinder because later on, when the child is born, you really realize that there is so much guilt-tripping that as a professional mother you are going to go through. There is so much judgment that as professional mothers and women that we enjoy. And some of this judgment also comes from ourselves as women. So I really had to learn to be a little bit gentler, but also to accept that I'm going to do this my own way. And set up the support structures that I needed. And I think, Metandi, you touched on this as well, as really setting up the systems. And then those support structures are different for each one of us because our realities are different. For some people, it means partnering well with your home partner. For me, it meant enhanced determination. It meant investing in paid support structure because I did not have a partner to go through this journey with me. And just recognizing that fact. But it also gave me the confidence later on to be able to have those difficult conversations in the workplace with my leaders in terms of what did I need, what support structures did I need in the office to be able to thrive. So it's really quite important to be deliberate, to really be clear in terms of how far you want to go, because along that journey, you are really going to be making choices on a daily basis as you pursue your career. And some of those choices are very difficult. So if you don't have your why, you are pursuing this, you are going to be struggling in anticipating some of those choice points where you need to make difficult choices about your career.
Thank you so much, Barbara. I think that was a very sobering input around, I think, some of the stereotypes that still continue to persist in organizations around professional moms, and the importance of organizations to really start breaking down those cultural barriers and creating an enabling space for parents. Also the importance of setting your intent, exercising agency, and pursuing excellence as a strategy for navigating a career as a professional mom. And you speak within the context of being a single mom. But I think what really came home to me was this thing about being kinder and gentler with ourselves. Because, I mean, the world's going to do its own bit on you. The least we can do is to not be to not engage ourselves the way that the world engages us as women and as moms. But I think what's key is that, you know, this importance about setting up a support system, not just in your home environment, but in the work environment, and not being shy to say, hey, this is what I need. This is what I need to survive here. Okay, Mom Charlotte, the EVP of HR and Corporate Affairs at SASO. We're waiting for your input.
Thank you very much. Good evening to the panelists. It's been such an enriching experience listening to the story so far and continue to listen. And thank you to Maurice Khatewe for having me here. And thank you to President Madelani to also having me here in the ULP family. Listening to the stories here, I'm quite inspired. I'm going to talk on two aspects. I'm going to talk on my role and my work as a leader in a business, and how we as business leaders can intervene and create cultures that are actually family-centric. And then I'm also going to give you some personal stories that I find fascinating. I'm an executive coach and a mentor. So a lot of times I work with very young professionals of both men and women in the workplace, and often people ask, how do you navigate the workplace and how do you navigate families? So I'm going to start with how I navigate families. I've always been married. So I got married at the age of 21. So and I had my daughter at the age of 22. So I had all my qualifications after nursing. So I did nursing and then I went back to varsity. So I had all my qualifications as a married mother. There was a stint of single parenting that I did between the ages of 25 and 29. And then by the age of 33, I was already a stepmom. So then my life continued. Often when I talk to young parents, young professionals, especially young female professionals, I tend to want to suggest that when you join a family and when you join an organization, you are on-ramping. And you cannot on-ramp at your own speed. You will crash if you think about the M1 or whichever freeway that you're on-ramping on. So to the guests that are with us here online, I just want to walk you through my own journey of how I navigated my family. I'm the first of a family of 4 girls. So I grew up in a family where we paint walls and we go on the roof and we deal with the stove chimney. So I don't understand gender in my head. And my mother worked in a hospital, first as a nursing assistant and then as a nurse. So the primary caregiver in my family was my dad. And my mother was more educated than my dad. If you think about maybe standard 6, Form 3, those kind of things. But the interaction between the two of them was very enriching. To me, when I look back, it taught me that caregiving is not a gender-based work. Because we tend to think that nurturing and caring, it's a woman's job. It is just a parent's job. And that will flip into what I'm going to talk about later when I talk about my work in HR and my work as a leader in business. The other thing about navigating your life and navigating your social spaces is to remember that we do live in gendered society. We do live in societies that know men and women. That's the reason why I had to tell you the story of my dad and my mom, and I had to tell you the story of the fact that I grew up there. So I became a mom very early. So one of the things, my daughter can cook, so if you go to her house, you're going to eat Woolworths food. Because I never thought it's necessary to teach my daughters how to cook. But I found it necessary to teach my boys how to use those machines in the scullery. If you read Melinda Gates' book, she talks about unpaid work. I decided very early as I got married that I'm not going to do unpaid work. And I want to really acknowledge the fact that I have privilege first to have a scullery with those machines that wash dishes and wash clothes. That's a privilege that I grew up into. When I was growing up, we did everything. My mom did everything as well. So that privilege I want to acknowledge. I decided that I'm not going to do unpaid work at home. And I want us to pause and think about when do we do unpaid work at home and what does it mean? I have two sisters that do that work simply because their socioeconomic status hasn't lifted them to a different space. And I want to acknowledge that. But the last time I actually did washing was when my daughter was 2 and she's 33. And it was because it was December and I didn't afford to buy new clothes for her. And I had to wash whatever was in the house. So those kind of choices, when we have the privilege to make them, they create space for you to go to school. Ever since I started studying, there was a time when I studied for 10 straight years. Because I had read a book early in my life, I think I was 22, 23, I read a book by Mom Ellen Kuzwai. Mom Ellen Kuzwai was born in 1914 and died in 2006. And when she was 75 or 78, she published a book. And that book was called Call Me Woman. There is actually one section of that book that I read over and over and over again and cried. When she said she needed to make sure that she runs the race, not for herself, coming out of a very torturous marriage, she ran the race for us. We stand on the shoulders of giants. We have people ahead of us that have cracked this for us. We need to live with it. Let me tell you a story now of my in-laws and how you on-ramp. And I learned this story with my in-laws, but it's a story that I give to other people as well. I married now into a very traditional family, and I'm Kiwanyana Kulikeshini. So I grew up in the townships. I'm from Pimville, Soweto. So, and I come from a very liberated family where you can wear what you like. If you're married to our family, I've never seen anybody in my family putting anything on their head. I mean, Mumakoti in my home dress as they like, and you find your own space. If you join my family, we have a lot of space for everybody, and that's my extended family. So but when I married into my in-laws, I had to read the space. And in reading the space, it's also the same thing you do in corporation, you read the space. So I read the space and I realized in this family, nobody wears pants. And they put things on their heads. So I watched all the makotis ahead of me, and I realized how they dress. I have been in that marriage more than a quarter of a century, more than 26, 27 years now. Nobody in my in-laws have ever seen me wearing a pair of pants, because they don't. So in the facets of a woman that I am, in my private life, I do navigate it given where I am. When I'm with my family, I dress as I please. But when I go to my in-laws, I don't. When I join a corporation, I join a corporation and then start navigating it and understanding what it takes to win in this corporation. Often we get into corporations and we want to write the rules. Then start your own business if you want to write the rules. Because in this corporation, this is how things are done. However, let me flip now to my role as a business leader, as a mom. Somebody who's been married ever and who has mothered for as long as I've been an adult from the age of 22. And I just want to share with you some nuggets of what is it that you do when you're in a corporation. And I've learned them from my own personal space, and that's how I was giving out those stories. First is the fact that find those nuggets of wisdom from others. Read stories of other women. Read stories of other men. Remember, we live in a gendered society, so we work in a gendered society. You will be perceived as a woman, but refuse to be perceived as a woman in other person's interpretation and definition of what a woman is. You've got to stay true to who you are. So in the work that I do, when I join corporations, I fight the battle for women. But I fight it in a way that I am not abrasive, but I do change the rules. So When I enter corporations, one of the things I want to understand is, what is the culture here? You remember the fact that my in-laws have never seen me with a pair of pants. And I do wear tights, I wear everything just like we all do. When I go join corporations, I first want to understand what they are about. Then I also break the rules, like my dad and my grandfather broke the rules then of nurturing girls and making sure girls go to school when it was not even fashionable. Then my aunts would go to school, but they did. So I do that. And I'm going to give some examples of some of the work that we have done. Some is at Sasol when I worked there, some it was at Coca-Cola when I joined, and some it was at Telkom. On the 1st of April 1999, I walked into the offices in Coca-Cola. I started as a performance consultant. And then a few days later, I think maybe the 7th or 8th, I start feeling funny. So I go to the doctor and I come back and the doctor says, you're gonna have a baby. And I look at my husband and my daughter and they're dancing and I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. I'm gonna have a baby and you guys are happy. So, you know, I just started a job. And then I walked into Sharon Schechter, my boss, and I said, Sharon, and this is on the 18th of April. I'm 18 days employed. And I said to Sharon, I'm pregnant. So she looks at me and says, so, what's wrong with being pregnant? And then I'm like, oh, it means nothing. Then fast forward December, my son is born, I go on maternity leave. And I said to her, she was American, she comes from America, she works here. And I said to her, oh, we are rewriting policies here. In our country, we have in the US, the maternity leave is very short. In my country, he says, oh, do whatever you want to do. Actually, you can keep the company car, keep the company cell phone. I'm like, oh, so she breaks the rules. I'm going to break the rules when I'm in a position of power. So I did. So I went on when we joined a company. You remember when HIV/AIDS was starting? And we were in the sandwich generation that takes care of our families and takes care of our older parents and younger children. So one of the things that we did when I was at Telkom, we changed the name of the leave. There's no bereavement leave and family leave and mothering leave. It's just family leave. And you don't have to explain to me that you're taking your sister to the hospital because they're going to go for a HIV test or they're going to pick up or they're in hospital. We changed it and called it family leave because gender in the workplace needs to be tampered with. It needs to be tampered with in languaging. One of the things that happens is what we call things, paternity leave and maternity leave. It is parenting leave. These days, there are same-sex couples that actually adopt children. They're not going to have maternity leave, but we are going to extend a parenting leave to them. So that kind of languaging we need to interfere with. One of the things that you do for mothers is also, if you come to Sasol, on the second floor, we do actually have a place where mothers can go and sit there and pump and put their milk in the fridge and take it when they knock off. We created those spaces because we knew we had young mothers. One other thing that is very important when you're in HR is to actually make sure, is to make sure that the young fathers feel also that they need to care for children. We need to break this attitude of thinking that only mothers can go to a 10-year-old swimming gala at 9 a.m. or 11 a.m. or 2 p.m. Fathers must too. Because if my colleague, who is a male colleague, is able to leave the building at 11 o'clock and go and watch the swimming gala, it means it's acceptable here. So the mother can leave at 1 o'clock and go watch netball. So we need to actually change how we think about parenting so that the mothers and fathers in the workplace feel equal, work equal, behave equal, so we can change the gendered workplace that we have. That's the work of leadership. The other thing in leadership is the fact that people will say very funny things in meetings. Trust me, I'm the first to come into your office and have a conversation with you. I'm known to actually be called for coaching by my bosses, the CEOs, Maurice knows this. Somebody was being very funny, one of the leaders where I work now, and I went to that person's office. It was going to be my word against their word until they reported me to the CEO. And the CEO called me and says, yeah, it's okay. You can talk about the fact that diversity is not really advanced here, but you choose your words very carefully. So I do choose my words very carefully, but I am going to intervene. I am going to intervene on the behalf of young people, whether they are male or female, young parents. We have a lot of young parents in Sasol, and I'm going to intervene on their behalf. One of the things that you have done is that we collected information, asked young parents, what are your challenges in the workplace? Of the 7 challenges, they said The top one was support us with childcare. It was not only women that said that. It was men that actually said it as well. Support us with care. We're in dual career families. We've got female-headed families. We've got same gender families where it's just two males that have a child. I do not want any of those colleagues to know that our policies are written in a way that favors men or favors women. So that's the thing that is important about culture in the workplace. We need to disengender. We need to have gender-neutral workplaces where men and women have equity and equitable stay and equitable practices. And people like us in leadership, we have to intervene. And that's the story that I wanted to share with you, that our lessons come from those in front of us. They come from our spaces in the social system, and we bring them to the workplace to make sure that there's equity and culture that embraces every single one of us.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Shah, and I was trying to catch your eye. And then she'd be like, and then I have another story. No, thank you so much for that input, because, especially your metaphor of on-ramping. And as you know, checking your environment, check coast, know exactly what you're going into. And I suppose that, if you don't make wise choices about your husband, then you must make sure that you check coast when you get into that environment. I'm saying this as a divorcee twice. So it's such a good point to be made about disengendering. And that actually, if we deal with issues as parenting issues, as human issues, then it covers everybody. And it actually liberates men as well to take up roles that they would historically not be allowed to take. It's often said that the biggest victims of patriarchy are men. And so it's a powerful point you're making, thank you, about the importance of disengendering the workplace. Okay, we're going to come now to Mr. Kanan Lakmiran from McKinsey, and partner at McKinsey.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. So firstly, it's a little bit intimidating to be after all of you. And as I was reflecting, actually, I came in thinking about how I was going to contribute to this, but also I was trying to take into account what you're doing. I think in the world today, if you don't explain things if you don't explain the business imperative, sometimes it's hard for people to get it. But I think we should start talking a little bit more about the moral imperative and the business imperative. And then also, hopefully, then you don't have to break any more rules, right? Because I don't think it's right that you have to break the rules. Why do you have to break the rules? It shouldn't be the case. So what's the moral imperative? I think we also have to get away from the moral imperative being equal. It's about equity. But equity doesn't mean it's the same thing, right? Because if you come from different backgrounds, just because you get the same chair, and if you're short and you're tall, doesn't mean you get the same advantage. You don't sit comfortably. You have equity is about looking at the situation of those who need it and dealing with that appropriately. From my religious background, one of the principles is the equality of men and women. And the analogy that's used is a bird. That until the two wings are both strong, the bird cannot fly. And you cannot transcend, we cannot do something new as humanity, or something even more wonderful, if we just think about equality, if we just think about staying where we are. And to transcend requires something different. And only when those two wings can fly can we see what's possible. And it's a new world, I think. I might be a bit, maybe blue, thinking a bit blue sky here, but I think that's what's in front of us. I think on the business, I'll start with the numbers as a consultant as well. I think on the business imperative side, McKinsey has done a lot of work over the last few years, including with Lean In, by the way. We produce a report every year on women in the workplace in the US, but then globally, we do something on gender parity. And if you just look at Africa, this is research, proper research that says, if we just get gender parity, we can add 10% to our GDP. Let alone what's possible once you open up the economy to everyone. This is just getting gender parity, just the cold hard facts. So there is a business imperative. And as I thought of the contribution, I thought of the people in my life, because I think that's, as you say, shaped it. And I wonder as a man, if you had to picture your wife, your mother, your daughter in front of you, your mother-in-law, would you do the same things? Is that how you would treat somebody in your workplace? And I think, since we're all getting personal in our stories, I should do that too. You know, my grandmother lived through 2 wars. She lived through World War II and she lived through a civil war in Sri Lanka. And her education was cut short by the first. And the second forced her to give up her life to take care of others. She had to take care of my aunt and my cousin because you know, my uncle was killed. And she had to keep doing all of these things. She had to cycle out of an area literally with my cousin to get to safety. You know, the things that she did. I think of my mother, who is an engineer, one of the first women engineers, and struggled to work as an engineer because of the challenges they faced. I think of my mother-in-law, who had to transition to become the primary breadwinner, and the challenges she faced to do all of this while taking care of 2 kids, and so on. I mean, these are the challenges they faced, and I wonder, would I behave in the same way if I remember their stories? So that's something else I think we should all as men think about, you know. How do we stop trying to get women to adhere to our rules, if you will, and how do we create this new paradigm? So I think there is going to be a lot of work ahead of us going forward, you know. How do we deal with biases? You know, Mackenzie is going through a process now which was spurred by, we've always worried about, you know, are we inclusive enough, are we diverse enough, and we set some targets about, you know, getting parity, 50% women at all levels, if not more. But we realized we're not moving fast enough. And I think also the recent events in the US in particular brought this issue of diversity and inclusion even more into stark contrast. So over the last few months, we've been in a lot of activities. And on Monday, I was actually in a call. We did some inclusiveness training. And I realized one of the phone calls, and one of, as we were saying, you know, what does bias look like? How do we get more women into energy, and it was actually an energy practice call. You know, how do we get more women in? And this is well-meaning people. We all want to do this. One of the first things we said, you know, we struggle to get young ladies to do more technical work. You know, we have to explain to them why they can do technical work. And I said, that's already a bias. You're assuming they don't want to do technical work, right? And this is in the well-meaning people. So imagine those who are not even thinking about it. So I think we have a lot to do. So as I think about what my contribution will be, I think the first one is I have to have this moral perspective in my head. I have to remember that this is the right thing to do. I have to remember the women before me and the women after me, my daughter, for example. By the way, I also spent 10 years with a woman boss, right? So my boss was a woman for 10 years, and I looked at her struggle. You know, when she used to get angry, everyone said she was emotional. When the CEO got angry, he was being assertive, right? You know, it's I mean, you know the stereotypes. So I remember their struggle, so I have to remember that. I think that's my contribution, one. I think the second contribution is to think about the workplace can't be as it is. So if we have pregnant women, you know, how do we take care of them so they can have, you know, can we have a different approach to work hours? Can we have a different approach to how we support them so that I think their contribution is even as valuable? We cut it short because we think we have an 8 to 5 work time, right? Who says you need to do that? We've got to think differently. How do we think of creating space when people have to go on parental leave and come back? The ramp on, ramp off. How do we keep space for them and they don't lose out? And these are things that we've got to change. So that's my contribution. I've got to think about that. I've got to think about how we create a place where you don't have to break rules, where the rule is it's inclusive. We figure that out later. Since we talked about facts, and I was reading this because it just came out, and it's very American-based at the moment, so forgive me for that. But with Lean In, with Sheryl Sandberg's organization, we did the most recent update after the COVID pandemic hit. And it's actually very sad, and I think we should just reflect, and I'm sure South Africa has got similar statistics. You know, the number is that it's possible in the US 2 million women could leave the workforce. not men, women. You know, women are working what they call a double shift. That means, and 1 in 4 feel that, you know, their performance will judge negatively because they have to take on this double shift, while 1 in 10 men think the same. In co-parenting households, this is interesting. Now, this is where parents, you know, both men and women are co-parenting. 44% versus 70% of the men think that the workload is fair. So the same, you know, different perceptions of what is fair in the workplace. As an example, black women, 52% feel that being, you know, they're the only, right? Women and black compared to women, 20% of others. So the statistics from research are also telling us how far we still have to go. And I think we have a lot to do.
Thank you, Kenan.